So she pushed all the way up and the ink went flying out onto the floor. There are many decisions that you have to make and you never know which is the right one.
What were you telling yourself at the time about the situation?
I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it.
Oh, maybe I've got something going here. And I love finding that moment.
I just hope that when they think of me, they think of positives. That's all.
Nana, thanks for joining me. It's so good to see you again, and I really appreciate you taking the time to have these conversations.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you, Dante.
There's I think, kind of famous story in our family that's sort of been forgotten about. I'm surprised we haven't talked about it yet on this podcast, but I was hoping that you could start off this episode by retelling that story, which takes place in your early years in the Catholic school with the nuns and a little bit of mischief. Do you know what I'm referencing?
Oh, yes, that one. I thought you were going to talk about something different. Oh, my goodness. I remember when I told you this story, it was at a family dinner. And I don't know what it was that prompted me to remember it. Whatever was being talked about brought it to mind. And you were all so shocked because you couldn't believe that I could do something like that.
That's exactly the way that I feel about that story. It's so fun to think about because it seems like not you.
Oh, me. I'm almost embarrassed. Well, I was in the second grade. I went to Catholic school and we had a very nice nun, a young nun. Sister Grace Geraldine was her name in second grade. And I don't know, how old was I? I must have been 7 or 8. The classroom had rows of desks, 5 rows, but 2 rows were together, and then a space, and then 2 rows together, and then a single row. And so I was seated maybe in the 3rd seat down, and with another student right next to me, so that our desks were attached. And I guess I must have been bored. I don't know what prompted me to do that. I just needed some action. So I whispered to the girl next to me, and she was, well, I was going to say she was very gullible, but I didn't know that word in the second grade, but I knew that she was a dummy. Maybe I'll say that. So that I understood in the second grade. So I said to her, the desks we had a section under it for books. So I said, put your hand in that little drawer. I said, it's your hand. Go all the way back. And so she went all the way back. I said, is it all the way? And she says, oh, yes. I said, now go all the way to the right till you come to the edge. And did she do it? Yes, yes. And then I turn it upside down so your palm is up. Did you do it? Yes. I said, now push hard all the way up. And she did that. And we had little glass inkwells because we learned to write with a straight pen and the desks had little glasses.
So you had a jar of ink
so
that
there
you
was
were...
in that corner was an open little glass with a little jar with ink. So she goes up and she pushes it all the way up, and our 2 desks were attached. So her inkwell was on the aisle, right? And so she pushed all the way up, and the ink went flying out onto the wooden floor. And Sister Grace Geraldine comes running over and tells the girl, what did you do? Why did you do that? And the girl was, she told me to do it. And the nun said to her, well, if she told you to jump off the Empire State Building, would you do it? And she had a fit. She had every right to have a fit. And this was in the morning. I had to go home, which I went home for lunch. I only lived a block away. And I had to come back with a rag and some lemons, right? So I told my mother, I have to go back with a rag and some lemons. And she said, why? Why? And I said, I told her what happened.
What did your mother think?
I don't know, she must have scolded me. I don't know. I don't remember what she told me, but I went back with the lemons. And in the afternoon, they sliced the lemons and we had to rub the lemons on the floor to get all the ink out of it. And I don't think it ever came out of the wood. But so
Was that the end of Mischief?
So that was the end of that mischief. I won't go any further.
Was it worth it?
Well, it's a very interesting memory that I have. It's worth it from that point of view, but I don't think, I guess, I don't know. I just must have, don't ask me why I did it, but I did it.
Well, that's funny, and it's a great story.
I don't know. I don't think I told it to you too well, but hopefully we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like we were saying before, I never think of you as somebody who is big into mischief. And there's a very common saying that people say all the time. They say, live your life with no regrets. And every time I hear that, I sort of chuckle because you have a different phrasing of that advice. For as long as I've known you, you've always said, don't do anything that you're going to regret.
Oh, okay.
I find that funny because it's a little bit more, it's a more like conservative approach to the same advice. But I'm curious, are there any mistakes that you've made in your life that have sort of ended up being very valuable and helped shape the person that you are today? Kind of like that one you just told me about.
I don't know that I could say mistakes. You know, in life, there are many opportunities that come along. And I don't know if I'm saying it right when I say opportunities. There are many decisions that you have to make, and you never know which is the right one. Do you go in this direction or do you go in that direction? And I can think of two in my own life that comes to mind immediately. I'm sure there are many others, but there was a point in my life when I had to make a decision. Do I get married or do I further my career? And I made the decision to get married, and I'm very happy that I made that decision. I don't know. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had gone the other way to further my career. I wonder about that. So that was one episode where life takes a turn. There was a second decision I made one time. I received a telephone call. This was before I was married, but I had started working. I was working as a speech therapist in a rehab department of a hospital. And I liked what I was doing. Before I did that, I thought I would try doing a private practice as a speech therapist. And I did have a customer, was a child who had delayed speech. And as I had set up a little office in my mother and father's home that had a separate entrance, and it worked out very well. And so this was one of my first so-called patients, but I had to go to their house, and I didn't like that very much because the child lived in what was then called the projects, and I had to take an elevator to go up, and I wasn't so happy about that. And so I knew that I wasn't so sure I wanted the private practice in that respect. But anyhow, I then went into the hospital situation. But when I was working at the hospital, I got this telephone call that I started to tell you about. And it was someone whom I did not know, who identified himself. He was a customer of my father in the restaurant. And there must have been a conversation that went on between customers at the table. And my father must have mentioned something because they were talking about speech therapy. It turns out this man was a lawyer, and he had a client that he's had for a long time. He was a family lawyer, a business lawyer, I don't know. And he called and he told me that my father had told him that I was a speech therapist, and he had an elderly man who had had a stroke and had aphasia, and that's what I was working at the same time at the hospital. And so he asked about my background, etc. We had a conversation that I think lasted close to an hour. And he wanted very much for me to come and take care of his customer. And we talked a lot. He asked me many questions, and we went through the whole reason for it, what happens in the brain, how you respond, what are the symptoms, et cetera, et cetera. And so apparently he was very satisfied that I knew what I was talking about. And when he asked me to take on his client as my patient, I said I didn't have time. I couldn't do it. And he really begged me over quite a number of minutes, to take it. And I was very apologetic, and I wished him luck, and I hoped that it worked out. But I just couldn't. I had the time, but I was not sure of myself, maybe, as I look back on it. And I knew that I had had this 4-year-old before with the delayed speech, and I had to go to go there, and I didn't want that again, and I wasn't sure what this private practice, if I still decided on it, whether it would work out. And so I just, out of lack of confidence in myself, I refused to take the job on. And I sometimes still think about that, wondering how that might have directed my work in a totally different direction that it subsequently took, because I later changed and went into education, and I loved what I did. I loved teaching. We talked about that before. But I sometimes wonder where that path might have taken me, because I knew what I was doing. I had been working at that, and I had had success at the hospital with my patients who had aphasia. And this man was a typical aphasia client. And the lawyer knew that everything I talked about, he knew that I knew what was going on. So sometimes I wonder, that's why I say in life, you take decisions and you have to make a decision. And I made my decision. I stayed where I was, and then I took a turn later on. But sometimes you go back and you wonder, what would have happened if I had gone this way? Listen, people sometimes wonder, what would have happened if I had married a different spouse? What my life would have been then if I had married this person instead of that person? And where would my life have been directed with that? These are decisions that everybody makes, and I'm sure everybody wonders about too.
Yeah, I have to think, I don't have kids, but I have to think when you have kids and you have grandchildren, you probably become a lot more confident in those decisions, because now you see, take, for example, had you married a different man, you and I would not be having this conversation right now.
Yes.
And so do you feel like when you have kids and you have grandchildren and you start to build those relationships, that it's easier to look back on those pivotal moments that shaped your life and say, oh yeah, that was the right call, because now look. Do you feel that way?
No, I don't. Yes, I feel that way, definitely. I have no regrets about the decisions I made at the time. But I sometimes wonder how, where I might be now if I had taken that path, I wonder. But definitely no regrets. I've had I'm very happy with the life that I've had. I'm blessed. I've said that to you so many times.
That's right,
Yes.
you have. And in terms of that particular career decision, choosing between having your own freelance business and going into a more structured teaching of education, did you consult your family or mentors or people around you, or do you feel like that was very much a
A
fear-based
very personal
decision?
decision. And I think I understood it more after the fact, afterwards, when I could look back and say, I made that decision because I was too afraid. I didn't have the courage, and I didn't have, when I'm on the phone and talking, and all I knew was, no, I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm afraid. And, it's later that you put a name to the reason why, you give it a name. The name was there, but you didn't think of it at the time.
Mm-hmm. What were you telling yourself at the time about the situation?
I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it.
I'm 25 years old, and even at 25, I can feel the acceleration of time year after year. And one of my favorite song lyrics is, "The acceleration of life is so humbling." How do you feel that time has moved differently throughout different points of your life? And how do you feel that time is moving now at 95?
Um, I always wanted to learn more. I was happy to learn. I loved being a student. And when I took a sabbatical, when I was teaching, I took it for education. And I remember coming home after one of the classes that I had and telling my husband, I could be a student for the rest of my life. I just loved going and learning. And I'm with it, I go into a class and I want to learn it. I'm with it. And I think that I was receptive, and I knew I was learning. I learned a lot, and I felt that I knew I was learning. And it wasn't until much later in life that I realized how the learning changed me. It's difficult to describe. I hope I'm doing it so that you can understand this too. While I'm learning, while I'm having all these, an environment in which something is always coming into my head, I'm still um, I'm still thinking, there's so much I need to know. I don't know enough. I don't know enough. I mean, other people know so much more about this, and I need to know more. There was an unease in me. I'm getting it's all coming in, but there was always more. And I never felt that I was intelligent enough to deal with all the things people were talking about. I always needed to get more, and it wasn't until much later in life, and I think it might have happened as people began to react to me in just everyday experiences, when I began to realize that, oh, I think maybe I know more than I think I do. Look, they think I'm so smart. I don't think I'm so smart, but I was able to do this, or I was able to do it, and I did have that. Maybe I know more than I think I do. I wasn't. It's you're going to send me for some psychiatric examinations, maybe. But this was very gradual. I loved learning. I loved it. I took it in. but I always felt I needed more. I wanted more. I was never up on a par, I always, and then little by little, then my reactions with people began to say that, they think I'm smart. I'm not that smart. How they think I'm smart. And then I carry on a conversation and I can see, well, as I get older and older and older, well, I knew enough to answer that question. I think it wasn't until I'm practically old that I realized maybe I did learn enough. Not enough. You never learn enough. You
Mhm.
never, ever learn enough. But enough to be able to handle various situations that come across.
Yeah, there is really a pivotal moment in the learning experience of whatever you're learning where you go from I'm not good at this at all to oh maybe I've got something going here. And I love finding that moment in whatever it is that I'm learning. I can totally pinpoint that moment in my videography career, and it's even what you described as having sort of a higher expectation or a lesser approval rating for your own skills than maybe other people do. And it's something that I think about all the time. And I've actually come up with a little like a corrected scale for how I grade my videography work because more often than not when I'm looking at something that I've done, I see everything that could have been better about it. I'm being a perfectionist. A lot of the minor flaws or details that most people wouldn't notice, those are the things that jump out at me. And so a lot of times what I think is maybe a C plus or a B minus of my work, I later find out that other people thought was an A minus or an A. And so in order to combat that, in order to combat my own mental illness, if you will, I've created I grade each project on a curve. That's what I'm trying to say. I grade each project on a curve. If I think that it's a C, I know that it's probably a B plus or an A. And then those few times where I'm really proud of something and it really looks the way I want it to look or better, and I think that it's a B plus or an A minus, that's when I know that I have something really special. Um, but I want to backtrack for a second because we were talking about the speed of time, and I'm curious, would you agree that as you get older, it feels like the time starts moving faster and faster?
Uh, I it's almost I almost want to say I think everybody feels that as you're getting older, but I don't feel it as much as some people say they feel it. And when I try to examine myself, why is it that I don't feel that speed is as fast? I think maybe it's because I'm still very active. There are still lots of things that I do, and I occupy myself with all of the various things I do mentally, physically. I'm still, and I'm not aware of the time speeding so fast because I don't think about it. I don't think about the time. I'm thinking about all the things I'm doing.
So your schedule is so packed that you're able to still fit so much into the
Well,
years.
but I don't have the stamina that I had in the past, and but it takes me 3 times longer to do something that it did 30 years ago, right?
Mm.
So I don't accomplish as much, but it takes the same length of time to accomplish that much less.
Are there periods in your life that you feel like flew by compared to others? If you were to compare being a child and growing up in your preteen and teenage years, and then uh, match that against when you were having children and raised your children, do you feel like there are certain chapters of your life that moved faster or slower than others?
I can't say that I'm aware of that. Um, in some of our previous discussions, we talked about a number of things that took place in my life. And when I think about them, I think about the times, how I lived it, how I lived in 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 my teaching career, for example, and my dealings with the students and the things that I accomplished school wise in various events, and I reflect on that. And I'm back into that situation, so I don't have a sense of feeling that it it all happened so fast. I'm relishing some of the wonderful feelings that I had. I'm relishing them, and I relish them at the same speed in which I think I accomplished them. I enjoy, I enjoy my reflections on things, and I don't associate it with time going by so fast.
Wow,
No.
that's really well said. I'm gonna have to carry that with me through life. I like the way that you just phrased that. I know that at 95, some days are better than others. And, a lot of times you're fighting your body because your brain, as I'm sure anyone who's listened to this podcast knows by now, is sharp as a tack. And at 95, no one's body is going to be what it was at 25 or 35 or
Oh,
45.
you're so right. You're so right.
And, we spend so much time together, which I'm super grateful for. And I feel like I've gotten to see the ups and the downs, and I've gotten to see how you navigate tough times a little bit. And I'm curious, what advice would you give to somebody who's navigating a tough time, whether it be a physical ailment or anything? What's your approach to navigating tough times?
Well, there are, I think, maybe two ways to answer that. One, you can't, you have to do your best to not let your body take over your life. Um, and when I say that, this is what I mean. I think that you have to use your body. You have to move. You have to go places. Walk. Use your arms. Um, don't look for the easy way out. Um, I mean, for example, I could pick up the telephone and call the Stop and Shop and give them a list of all the groceries I want, and then they will fill them. I see when I'm in the shop, the people are filling bags. You can get all your groceries, and then you can have them delivered, and you just pay that, and you didn't have to do any of that. That's not what I think you should do. So I make myself go out, but sometimes I don't feel like it. But I go, and I enjoy being there. Once I'm out, I'm happy. I got into my car a couple of days ago. The weather was beautiful. The sun was shining, and the sky was blue. And I'm by myself. I'm driving in my car, and I'm saying to myself, "Look at that! How beautiful! Look at how blue! I'm so glad I came out. I feel different than I felt 20 minutes ago when I was in my house." So I think you have to move. You have to continue living the life that you had as best you can. I realize that there are certain things that one can't do anymore. I know it myself for my own body, but I'm make myself. And I don't feel like it. My legs are so slow, whatever. But I make myself do that. So then there was a second. Now you see, I hope I can bring it back. I hope I can bring it back.
We were talking about ways that you navigate tough situations.
I hope it'll come back. This will happen. One is to move your body. And the second, you have to stay in touch with people. I think that to me is the most important thing. You may not want to go out just for all the reasons I said, and you push yourself to go. But there's a second aspect is to keep your mind going. And to keep your mind going, it needs to be fed. And how do you feed your mind? You can feed it by social interaction with people. You can feed it by reading. You can feed it by learning something that you might have always wanted but never had a chance to delve into it. Or you can dig into something that you have had a taste of but never really followed it through. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but you have to keep yourself going physically, but you have to keep your psyche going. You've got to feed that psyche. And I know that if I spend an afternoon with my friends playing bridge, I'm I'm resurrected. You know, that's not the you know what I
Sure,
mean.
yeah, you're uplifted.
Yes. If I started to read something that I hadn't thought about but wanted and continued to go into this, by the time I could be with it for 2 or 3 hours, and when I finished, I feel like I have to now come back to reality. It carried me away into another sphere of mental activity that when I close the door on that, it takes me a little while to come back to the reality. Oh, yes, I'm in my house. I'm on my sofa. Yes, here I am. Oh, I have to get dinner ready. Certainly, I have to get myself into a more normal situation than what I was for 2 or 3 hours inside this other sphere of interest that I had.
Well, I think that's the greatest health prescription I've heard in a while. Don't stop moving your body and keep your body active and keep your mind active. I love that. I absolutely love that. Um, I don't know how much you think about legacy at 95. I'm not sure if you think about it a lot or not at all, but what do you want people to remember about you?
Well, I think doing this podcast is number one. At least when I leave the earth, my children and grandchildren will be able to push a button somewhere and they'll see me in my physical body and in my mental pursuits. And I think that to me was number one when we first talked about, recording some of the things that I still remember about life and family and such.
Do you think about legacy a lot or not at all?
Um, well, I'm hoping that my children will remember how to cook certain dishes that they like. They've asked me for the recipes, and I hope that when they make them, they'll think of me. Um, I I hope that when they think of me, they'll think of some of the things I liked and disliked, or mostly liked, in terms of music or in terms of dancing. I love dancing all my life. Um, but I just hope that when they think of me, they think of positives. That's all.
I like that.
Positives.
Yeah, I read a quote recently that I'm probably gonna botch, but it went something like, when you die, people aren't gonna remember what you did. They're not gonna remember what you said, but they're gonna remember the way that you made them feel. And I'm curious, like, how do you bring that into all of your interactions with people every
I
day?
think it's just the way you live your life. I don't think you can think of that and then name it. I think it's just your whole way, your attitude, how you see things, how you feel about things, about you know, about things in general. How what you like to eat, what you like to hear in the terms of music, what you like to talk about when you're with people, um, how you react to different situations and to different items that come to light, whether they are new discoveries or whether there are old recollections, just how you react to the things that you're presented with.
Hmm. I know that there's so many ways that your generation is so different from mine. And a lot of people are not as fortunate as we are to interact with one another, being from such different generations, to interact with one another so frequently. Is there anything that you wish that my generation could understand that maybe they don't realize yet?
Your generation is being bombarded with so much technical information and technical um, ways of doing things that just didn't exist in mine. So it's very hard for me to answer that question as you put it. So what am I expecting? I'm hoping that they will not lose some of the special things that belong to the generations before their generation. Um, for example, I had a conversation with a friend yesterday, and we talked about the College Light Opera Company. And she had asked me what I thought about the presentations that were done this summer. And I said, I said they had there quite a number of new shows that they did, and they're still keeping. They still have two shows a season that are Gilbert and Sullivan. And I said to her, but I will tell you that the audience was not a complete audience for the Gilbert and Sullivan, whereas for the others, it was a sold out. And she says, yes, that's because she's involved with Clock and she knows the finances as well as what's going on with the business. And she said that they have to really think about surviving, and they don't have the full houses with the Gilbert and Sullivan. And that's because of the new generation, your generation, is not that interested because you've not been exposed as much as your parents and grandparents to that music. And I'm just hoping that you asked me what the new generation should do or would like. I hope that they don't lose it. And I can tell you, when I was growing up, as a young teenager, I grew up with Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby, and all of that particular uh, group of entertainers.
What is it called? The Rat Pack?
Oh, them that too, right? But my father would hear me listening to this, and he would say, what kind of music is that? And what did he like? He liked the opera and the symphonies, and I wasn't that interested, in that, although having heard so much of the opera, because that's what on on Saturdays, he would always be hearing it from we would, straight on the radio. We had the radio. I was listening to his music all the time, and so I learned to appreciate it. And so and as I grew into an adulthood, I learned to appreciate the Gilbert and Sullivan, which is not quite as classical as the operas and symphonies. And so I hope that your generation, as you favor your new experiences and experiments in music, that you don't lose an understanding of your parents, or your grandparents, I went from opera and classical, and people still have that today. I don't say it doesn't exist, but I'm hoping you your generation doesn't lose the opera, the operettas, and as we go down, that even though it's that you just don't lose it.
Yeah. That's such a great example as music. And I feel like seeing the evolution of music is a really good vehicle to show how much the world has changed, right? You talked about how your parents and your father in particular loved the opera and maybe couldn't really adapt to this new era of music in Frank Sinatra, the Rat Pack, Bing Crosby, right? And now I know that I know that that whole generation is still so what's the word I'm looking for? Revered. Frank Sinatra, still very revered.
Well,
but
don't my father would not revere it though.
Right? And I think about how much the music has changed since your generation with Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, right? Like I was raised on Billy Joel. My dad loves Billy Joel, and I was raised on that music, and it is still so different from what is popular today. You know how much I love today's music, and I like to think that I can appreciate all generations of music. I really do feel that way, but I am such an avid fan of today's music, which I think is electronic music. And I know that sometimes I've played that for you in the car, and you've described it as hypnotic, and maybe not in the most positive way. I'm curious, does that remind you at all of maybe your father's view of the music of his generation versus yours?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I could just see, from you to your father to me to my father, how people have responded. And I still find it really hard to listen to what I think you call rap, where they just talk, talk, and this is not music to me, right? I don't see it as music as I knew it, but yet your generation and the generation following yours
loves it.
Yes.
It's really the staple of our generation, or I shouldn't say the staple, one of the staples of our generation for sure. Yeah, I sometimes think about how much people struggle to appreciate the music of the generations that follow them. And it really worries me because I don't want that to become me. And I'm very paranoid about staying on top of the latest music. And I'm not forcing myself to like anything. I know what I like and I don't like, and I like to see the evolution of music. But I fear that if I am not constantly involved in the music scene, that sooner or later there will be such the gap of the music I listen to between what I listen to versus what's relevant with today, that gap will widen. And if I let that gap widen enough, I won't be able to bridge that gap. And so my strategy is to to keep music in my life, to keep new music in my life, because I would hope to God that 25 years from now, when I'm 50, that I can enjoy the music of that generation the same way that I enjoy the music of my generation.
That's right. I think you have to be open. You have to let it come into you, so that you can respond to it from within. It's very difficult to put into words. It is very difficult, but you can't just give yourself the freedom to let it come in. Not to say, oh, I don't like that. Oh, that's not music. Oh, that's terrible. Just let it. That's why I said to you, your electronic music. I mean, I'm sitting there listening, and it's doing something. And I labeled it hypnotic because I didn't think I was going to like this at all. It's so new and it's so different from music that I grew up with. It's definitely different, But as you just sit and don't think too much, you begin to respond. And I use the word hypnotic, and that kind of scares me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I said it to you, because I feel I like to be in control, right? And when you feel there's a hypnotic sense, you feel almost you're losing certain control because your body is responding, but your mind is, you want to be in control with
Mm-hmm.
your brain, not totally with your emotion.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you labeled it as hypnotic, I don't disagree with you, but I think our attitude towards it being hypnotic is what's different, right? I like to I- the I don't mind it when the music is hypnotic, if you will, and I sort of get to sit back and go on this journey. But I totally understand what you mean in not wanting to lose control. But I guess the fact that the music is doing something to both of us shows
Mm-hmm.
that it's working, right?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
When you think back to the Gloria who was listening to Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby, just music aside, but taking yourself back to being maybe a teenager, were you a teenager when,
Yes, yes.
if you could for a moment go back and see that Gloria on the street and give her some advice from 95-year-old Gloria, what would you say? And maybe not just advice, but if you could say anything, what would you say?
The first thing that comes into my mind is that as much as I responded to Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra and that whole era of time, I still didn't lose some of the things that my father was interested in. And when I say that, I don't just mean opera. My father liked liked to sing. My father liked to dance, and my father was a very good dancer. And my father taught me to dance. I must have been 10 years old, but when there was a party and there was dancing, the first dance I ever danced was with my father, and it was a polka. And I loved polka music because my body responded to the melody, and maybe that's why I love dancing too. And if I danced with my father, we danced either the polka or the waltz or a mazurka or whatever. And that was not my teenage area. So while I am interested in Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra, I still had a tie to the music that most of my teenagers didn't, choose to listen to. And so I can see that as the generations go by, this is what I was saying before. I'm hoping that you can take a glimpse of or keep a glimpse of the various ones, even though at your age now at 25, you're interested in electronic music. That just never existed. But
That's
but
so good here.
don't lose the connections to music of other generations. That's it. I feel I'm not explaining myself too well here today.
No, I think you've explained it perfectly. Is there any sort of general life advice or anything, music aside, if you had a moment to say anything to a 15-year-old Gloria, what would you tell her that you know now?
I liked what I did. I mean, I can't say I didn't like doing this or I like doing that. I mean, I think I had a happy life. Uh, I mean, I wasn't the well-behaved don't talk unless you're spoken to or whatever. I wasn't like that. I was free to say what I wanted to say, and I can't explain to you. I think perhaps I am what I am because my parents weren't strict enough to put put stops in me. I don't remember having to not do something that I wanted to do. I don't remember that. I don't remember a situation. I just remember one thing ever, and I'll never forget that, when my mother was so very, very angry with me. And that was, I was 14 or 15. Yes, 14 or 15. And I had I was friendly with a pair of twins, and they were a year or two older than I, and they loved to play tennis, and they really taught me. And we went to play tennis in a park one time, and I could have played all day. I often did at that age. And one day we played and stayed at the park playing tennis, and then we walked back home. And when I got to my house, my mother was outside livid because she didn't know where I was. She knew that I had gone to play tennis, but she expected me back 2 hours earlier.
Ooh.
And it was horrible. I mean, first of all, they were with me. My mother scolded me so strongly. I said before I didn't think I had limits, but I remember this vividly, vividly. But I was also very lucky that both my parents were very, very supportive, very supportive, and they would listen when I spoke, and I talked all the time, even as a child. So you can see why I'm a talker even today. But they were always very encouraging. They always listened. They were always happy. I would come home telling them, oh, this great thing happened at school and whatever. And I was very open with my parents. I spoke a lot with them growing up, and they were always supportive and always listened. This is what I grew up with as a child.
Well, that's really nice. You had the sort of the freedom to discover yourself.
But there were some times when, like when I talked to you about college, I wanted to go to one particular school, and she said no.
Yeah.
Remember? And I couldn't do that, right?
Yeah.
I went to, and I didn't regret it, as I said then. But don't think it was all, peaches and cream here,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
My mother was really a very wise woman. But what what how she felt, and there was no sugarcoating it. That's the thing. She didn't sugarcoat anything.
Very honest and very what's the word I'm looking for? Blunt.
Oh yes, very much so. Now you knew her when she was elderly, and so you didn't see these qualities because she was she was 103 when she died.
I remember.
And she had all her senses.
Well, God bless her. I hope that she knows that we're thinking about her and talking about her. There's the legacy right there, right? Here we are thinking and talking about her. So
yeah, but I don't have a podcast though, do I?
That's right. Well, we'll do our best to preserve her via our memory of her.
Okay.
Well, I know we have an excellent dinner planned tonight, and I'm getting a little hungry. So what do you say we wrap this up?
That's fine.
All right. Thank you so much, Nana. I love you. It's so great to have these conversations.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to the next one.
This. And thank you for helping me to bring back happy memories. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right. Bye now.
Bye.